Chigwell Men's Club. Well, David Davis MP was born on a council estate and went on to challenge David Cameron for the leadership of the Conservative Party. Irvine Welsh was born the son of a docker and a waitress and rose to fame as the author of Trainspotting. We asked them both, what are the life chances for working-class teenagers and who are their champions?
Bob Crow, I guess, is, in my view, probably the last of a generation of working-class people who were able to get on. I mean, the opportunities available to his generation, my generation, were enormous to advance ourselves, to come to the top of our profession, whatever they may be. That I think has passed, and I think today somebody in the same position he started in or I started in would find it much, much more difficult. So in a way he's emblematic of a past generation.
So you agree with one of the voices we heard from Chigwell Men's Club that if you're young and working class, you have gone back in time?
Absolutely. When Crow and I were young men, the emblematic people were the Beatles or Michael Caine or David Bailey, all people who'd come from a working class background and were then emblematic of their generation. Today, what is it today? It's James Blunt, or it's Cumberbatch, not people who come from a working class background. So I think the emblems, the roots are very much different today.
And Irvine Welsh, should a working class teenager look to a figure like Bob Crow and a former Viscount like Tony Benn to help them, or should they look inside their own family, inside their own spirit, which is what some people told us in Chigwell? Do it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look to yourself. I mean, personally, I agree with everything that David said. I think it's absolutely spot on. And I think people do have to look to themselves. They have to look to their own salvation. They have to look to the kind of salvation of the people around them, because certainly the establishment will do that. We've seen kind of what 30 years of neoliberalism have done to working class people and working class communities across Britain. So the establishment aren't going to look after them. The Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats. Some people will find an individual salvation. Some people will find a collective kind of banding together to further their own interests in their own communities.
Who is fighting for the working class now? And could you put names to faces, Irvine Welsh?
Well, I don't think you can really in the same way. I mean, I just think the whole system has changed. We had a kind of trade union movement. We had a sort of very strong trade union movement which challenged the power of kind of the elites in society, and now that power has been kind of taken away by legislation, and so you don't really have that kind of challenge. The answer does become a very individualistic one. A young person now, it makes much more economic sense to buy a rock of crack cocaine and cut it and sell it and deal it and buy a gun than it does to actually go to college.
Well, I hope that's not true, but but I agree that the answer is in individual strength and effort. I mean, if there is an avenue for young people today from a working class background, it's probably a creative avenue through the internet and so on. That at least is easier than it was. You don't have to be quite so advanced in your career to get in to become a bestseller, whether it's a bestseller as a writer or a bestseller as a singer. That's a little bit more open, but frankly, so far, I think the working class haven't really benefited much from that.
We've seen a week with this coincidence with tragic implications for the family members of Bob Crow and Tony Benn. They're all in mourning. But what does it represent for the rest of us, David Davis, and how critical are the questions that we've been discussing about divisions of power in the country?
Well, I think it's a really important wake-up call. Both the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister talk about social mobility. Actually, social mobility is failing in Britain. It's also failing in America as well. It's worst it's been for a very long time in both countries. And actually, the whole legitimacy of society rests on the idea that everybody has a decent chance. That was far more true 25, 30, 40, 50 years ago than it is today, and we really have to get a grip of it, because if we don't, then people will really start to object, and the legitimacy of British society, American society, and our whole approach to business and work and life will fade.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. That's the kind of big challenge, but I don't think that it's a challenge that the last 30 years of neoliberal policies are up to meeting. I think that these kind of policies and that approach and that kind of consensus between the Labour and Conservative parties has kind of exacerbated this social malaise that we're in. Also going to be true now for middle-class people who are going to pressured and squeezed at the expense of the elite is some of the services that middle-class people, like the National Health Services, become more compromised. It's just in this kind of sort of crazy sort of desire we have to sort of continue to line the pockets of the super wealthy.
Finally, who are your own working class heroes?
Tony Benn wasn't working class, he was an aristocrat, but basically politically his heart was on the right side, and a tremendous admiration for him. I think that the thing about these guys is that that their kind of passing does represent the death of of post-industrial socialism. What happens next is an interesting thing.
I have no working class heroes. I don't think of it in those terms, but I do fear for the future of young working class boys and girls in Britain today. And the working class hero I want to have is the next one who's going to make it to the top.
David Davis MP and Irvine Welsh. It's lively in our inbox.